Good evening. My name is Christopher Adams, and I'm the rector of St. Paul's College here at the University of Manitoba. I join with my colleagues at the Arthur V. Mauro Centre for Peace and Justice and the University of Manitoba in welcoming Dr. Louis Kriesberg to give the St. Paul's College University of Manitoba Affiliation Lecture. Dr. Kriesberg, we welcome you and Paula Friedman to our good college and university. I also want to welcome all of you who made it out here this evening on this slushy and snowy day. I'm not sure which it is, but I know the conditions aren't brilliant. I wish to note that our college and the Forks of the City of Winnipeg sit at the crossroads of the Anishinaabe, Métis, Cree, Dakota, and Oji Cree nations. The college acknowledges specifically that we are in Treaty 1 territory and on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe peoples and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Before I turn the microphone over to my colleague, Janice Ristock, I would like to express our appreciation for the funding support received from the law firm of Aikins, and I'm glad Tom Dooley's here. Hello, Tom. As well as the Arthur V. Mauro Peace and Justice Fund, St. Paul's College Foundation, and from the University of Manitoba through its continuing support of the Jesuit Academic Funding Agreement. Also, for the vision of Dr. Arthur Mauro, who through his own life experience knows that peace amongst us is possible, and for challenging all of us to know this for ourselves. All of the donations that we receive tonight and on other evenings in support of these efforts are matched by Dr. Arthur Mauro for the Arthur Mauro Peace and Justice Center. Please be aware that photos and videos will be taken at this lecture and afterwards as the evening unfolds, and we are streaming live this evening. Now I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Janice Ristock, who is the University of Manitoba's Vice Provost of Academic Affairs and Professor in the Women's and Gender Studies program. She will bring greetings on behalf of the University of Manitoba and President David Barnard. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Chris, and good evening. I'm very pleased to be here and to bring greetings on behalf of President David Barnard and to welcome you to the Fort Garry campus of the University of Manitoba. This annual lecture, the St. Paul's College University Affiliation Lecture, is a very important opportunity and one that we celebrate because we celebrate the long-standing relationship between St. Paul's College and the University of Manitoba. And so we're very pleased to co-host tonight's lecture by Dr. Louis Kriesberg on the constructive conflict approach. And I think most of us are aware in the city and in the province that there has been increased attention, if you like, to human rights issues or an increase in the kinds of conversations that we're having, in part because of the national focus on the upcoming opening of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. But some of you might not be aware that at the University of Manitoba, we have formally identified human rights as an institutional priority that's part of our strategic planning framework, and that's very important to us. We have well over 150 researchers from different disciplines who are engaged in human rights research projects, and often these researchers are working in collaboration with community organizations, government, industry. They're engaging their undergraduate students, they're engaging graduate students, and we think they're doing work that's of importance not only to the academic realm, but to addressing human rights and social justice issues. We were honored recently at the university to be named as the home for the National Truth and Reconciliation Center. And this is the first and only research center of its kind in Canada, and it's one to be poised as a destination for human rights scholars from Manitoba, across Canada, and across the globe. And of course, St. Paul's College is home to both the Joint Master's and a PhD program in Peace and Conflict Resolution, and the hosts of tonight's lecture, the Arthur V. Mauro Centre for Peace and Justice, a center inspired by the belief that working together, individuals of diverse religious faiths can be significant peace builders. So as a university community, we strive to be a center of outstanding research, a leader in innovative teaching and learning that advances local, national, and international conversations on human rights and social justice. And so tonight we're very proud to be co-hosting an event that aligns with those ambitions. So our thanks very much to Dr. Louis Kriesberg for being here this evening. Our thanks to our partners, St. Paul's College, for a long-standing and successful relationship with our university. And thanks to all of you for being here this evening. So I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and I should also wish you a happy St. Patrick's Day. Thanks.
Now, I'd like to ask Mr. Ab Frieg to come up and introduce our guest speaker. Ab is, as well as a new friend of mine, he's also the Arab-Jewish Dialogue Group co-chair, and he's a member of the board of directors of the Arthur V. Mauro Centre for Peace and Justice. Thank you, Ab.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. It's a great honor and pleasure to be able to introduce such an accomplished person that I have so much respect with since I have got to know you in the last 45 minutes or so. Professor Kriesberg is Professor Emeritus at Sociology and Maxwell Professor of Sociology at Conflict Studies at Syracuse University. As I mentioned, very, very accomplished. He has written over 160 books and articles that were published, including Constructive Conflicts and books on conflict transformation and peace building, international conflict resolution, timing of de-escalation of international conflicts, and many, many more books. We are in for really a treat to have Dr. Kriesberg come and speak to us tonight. I actually, personally, after talking to Lou, we found a lot of things in common as well that we have here in Winnipeg. As many of you would know, we have the Arab-Jewish Dialogue that we started in 2006 here in Winnipeg, and a group of Arab and Jews that meet on a regular basis, and many of the members are here. And find out, Lou started this in 1981, way before we started that, and we're very, very happy with that. And based on that, the co-chair, Howard Mori, and I have talked about, and we will be asking you to be the honorary member of the Arab-Jewish Dialogue here in Winnipeg. So welcome here, and we look forward to the presentation.
Well, I am very happy to be here, and I trust that you will be happy that you are here by the end of the talk. I had the pleasure of, a group of us went to the Museum of Human Rights earlier today. It is a magnificent structure, and the conception is just wonderful. I think you should be very pleased, proud, and Canada and the rest of the world will be in your debt for what you've accomplished in that endeavor. What I would like to do is give you some idea about the constructive conflict approach and some applications. As an academic, I want you to read more about it, and the website may be difficult to see. If you just go to Kriesberg at Syracuse University, go to faculty, you'll be able to get access to a website and read more of my stuff. But what I want to do simply this evening is to talk a little bit about the decline in violence, the ideas of the constructive conflict approach, and then something about some applications. The first argument I want to make to you is that mass violence has been going down. Now, this comes up in casual conversations when people are decrying what is obviously terrible circumstances. We're distressed, dismayed, saddened by what's going on in Syria, Ukraine, and Central Africa. And yet I keep mentioning to people in the US, you know, there's less violence. And they say, no, that's not so. Now, maybe the Canadians you have a little different view of it, but you can understand for USers, the idea that violence just goes on and on and on is more understandable because in the last decade, the United States has been involved in a lot of mass violence. But statistically, certainly since the end of the Cold War, there's been a pretty steady decline in battle deaths, in international wars, and intra-states, domestic civil wars have also gone down some and been pretty stable. These data are from the Human Security Report, which produces data collected elsewhere, and you can download all the data from the Simon Fraser University Human Security Report, and Andrew Mack is the director of that project. And he also, in the most recent report, which just came out, analyzes the reports, the analysis of Steven Pinker, a psychologist of Harvard University, who gives good documentation that not only has violence decreased in wars since the end of the Cold War, but going back to early humankind in the prehistoric eras, where killing among humans seemed to be quite prevalent, there has been a fairly steady decline in violence of all sorts. And you know, the development of a nation state, of civilizations, did mean that there were governments that would control. They were the only ones who could use violence legitimately. They controlled this, and deaths decreased. So I'd like to offer some explanations for this. One, and just focusing on the last few decades since the end of the Cold War, the Cold War itself was obviously a producer of violence. Proxy wars were waged. Maybe the US and the Soviet Union did not throw nuclear weapons at each other, but they engaged in proxy wars. The United States engaged in covert and overt activities in Central America to stop communism. The wars in Korea and Vietnam were products of the persistence of mass killing. With the end of the Cold War, that stopped. A lot of conflicts that had been going on got settled. There were some new ones, but on the whole, that simple fact changed the frequency of wars. Furthermore, it made the UN more operative and able to function better. And the UN, I say this with the UN, because in the United States, and I guess to some extent in Canada, unfortunately, the UN is not considered such a great institution. But it was the UN that has intervened and stopped a lot of civil wars. More of the civil wars are ended by negotiation than by one side simply crushing and destroying the other. And there were many other non-governmental and governmental organizations that function in the world to ameliorate the causes and the persistence of violence. The other thing that's happened is there's been some normative change, some of the ideas that people have about each other and what's right and what's wrong. There was a time when wars were celebrated. It's a test of manhood, of nationhood, of peoplehood, that you could fight a war. Nobody talks that way anymore. You may go to war, but it's done reluctantly. You know, they forced it upon us. They were doing bad stuff, and so we had to. But it's with regret. And that is the norms about these things have changed. The growth of the understanding about civil rights, about universal human rights, has grown and is appreciated, and is some constraints on the kind of violence that otherwise has occurred. And finally, as far as the causes that I want to mention, there have been the development of some skills and knowledge about how to do conflicts better. And that's what I want to talk about. The constructive conflict approach starts off with the premise that conflicts are necessary, they're inevitable, and they're often good. We fight for a lot of good things, liberty, justice. There are conflicts often that are necessary, but they can be done badly or done well. And the idea that conflicts often are, and certainly could be more often be conducted constructively, is should be of common sense. And I want to give you some parts of the realities around the world which make it common sense, that we can do better in the way in which we fight for human rights, for liberty, for equality. And the first reality that I want to stress is that it can be waged in many different ways. We sometimes define conflict as what goes on when people hurt each other. But in the constructive conflict or the conflict resolution or the peace studies fields, there is the awareness that when we do wage a conflict, we do it often with persuasion. We want to convince the other side that what we want is good, and it's good for you too. We share values, we share interests, we really could work together for something which is to our mutual benefit. And you try to persuade the other side of that. Sometimes you succeed. Or at least it done in collaboration and partially with other kinds of inducements, it works without resorting to the grossest kind of violence. And the other thing is that there is rewards. You buy people off, you promise them benefits, and you give them benefits if they will agree to what you want. And finally, there is all kind of nonviolent coercion that's possible. There's been a lot of work done with economic sanctions and other kind of sanctions, and also on direct nonviolent action where people protest, people organize, withdraw their support for the authorities, and then the authorities have no authority if it's withdrawn by the people who otherwise were lending it to them. The other reality is that conflicts are socially constructed. We make up what the conflict is about, and we all agree. We usually agree that what we want is good and right, and they're denying it to us. Well, who are the we and who are the they? We have to decide that. And in every conflict, there's often a disagreement between the we and the they as to who they and we are. Are we Russians? Are we Bolsheviks? Are we communists? Are we Ukrainians? Are we what? And are we Americans? Are we capitalists? Are we freedom fighters? And how we define each other in that regard is crucial. And the fact is that, furthermore, those things change. And as they change, the nature of the conflict changes, the nature of the possible resolution and transformation of it occurs. Furthermore, the third reality is that in large-scale conflicts, you're dealing with heterogeneous contenders. The adversaries are not unitary. America, U.S., I'm sometimes sensitive to the use of America to refer only to the United States of America, and some of you may be even more sensitive to it than I. But forgive me if I slip sometimes and say America rather than U.S. The U.S. doesn't do anything. How could the U.S. do anything? The President of the United States can order some people to do some things which they may or may not do, and other people who are American citizens may do this or that, urge one thing or the other, oppose one thing or the other. It's a diverse actor, and so is Al-Qaeda, and so is the Russian Federation. It's made up of a lot of different factions, groups, which are shifting. They're shifting among each other, and as to who's dominant and who is not dominant. And as they shift internally, the relationship between the other parties necessarily change. Which brings me to the fourth, which is that the conflicts are interlocked. No conflict is isolated. It's always got enmeshed in internal factions, rivals to the leadership, and that conflict between and among the leaders of one group or the other is often a bigger explanation of how they're acting internationally than what the reality is outside. We all know these things, but then we slip and start talking about the U.S. doing this or Russia doing that. But if you keep it in mind, it opens up possibilities of a conflict being dynamic as it shifts things internally, or as other allies shift. The nature of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has shifted a great deal with the end of the Cold War, with the escalation of the Cold War, with the rise of more Islamic identities, dozens of other things. And so it's not a fixed, static relationship. And again, all that becomes opportunities for constructive change. Sixth, there's the possibility of using mediation, which increasingly is being used to manage conflicts of a large scale, partly because of more effectiveness of the UN, partly because of the knowledge that is helpful and can be helpful. And finally, one reality is that paying attention to the way the other person, what about, oh?
Yeah, we can jump one.
7, okay. Thank you. I have a choice of either watching what's up there or watching you, and I'd rather watch you. Okay, 6, 7. If you pay attention to what the other people think and are doing, you are more likely to be effective than if you don't. And the best predictor of what somebody else is going to do is what they say they're going to do. So listen attentively, and you're more likely to make good judgment about how to even wage your own conflict with them by paying attention and giving that good regard. Okay, I want to turn to 2 areas of conflict where the U.S. was involved, as well as others, and begin with 9/11. And then I'll talk about the U.S. mediation in the Middle East. 9/11, the 9/11-2001 attacks were shocking to everybody in the U.S. and around the world. There was an immense outpouring of solidarity from countries and peoples all over the world. Americans rushed to bookstores to read about Islam and wanted to know how this could have happened, what was going on. The Iranian government aided, volunteered assistance. They were not enamored of the Taliban and wanted to help. The President of the United States was shocked. Apparently hadn't anticipated any such thing despite a lot of warnings. And he declared GWAT, Global War on Terrorism. That was a social construction, that what we were engaged in, we, the United States of America, was in a war against terrorism. And there are a good number of reasons why that kind of social construction was counterproductive and led to more destructiveness than was necessary. For one thing, as many people observed immediately, hell, there's been terrorism in human history all the time. If we declare war on terrorism, we'll never be done. And when could we possibly think that this war would be over? It made it necessary to try and kill them all the people who were part of and engaging in terrorism. And any means would be justified. And of course, all over the world, people could say, hey, we got terrorists too. And so every government who had anybody that they were against say, we got terrorists, you got to join us in fighting our terrorists. And there was no distinction made substantially about what it was that the United States was against. And it made it a boundless war. We made it justifiable, obviously, to invade Afghanistan, to try to destroy the Taliban, who had given a haven to Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. It was used in a unclear fashion as a justification for going to war against Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11, but in the midst of saying, well, they got weapons of mass destruction, they could pass it on to terrorists. You know, then there was a connection, maybe, we think there was a connection, and there was no leverage given that kind of construction to say, hold on. And I try to offer some other strategies which were talked about immediately, other ways of constructing what the conflict was about and how it could be waged. And to some extent, some of that came into more existence when Obama was elected, and even some of it began to occur in the second term of the Bush administration. Rumsfeld disappeared. Cheney began to have a little less influence. The neocons were a little chastened, though Cheney is unchastened. Cheney says, we have to go back to the way we were in 2003. 2003, yeah, when mission was accomplished, the war was victorious. Unfortunately, there was followed by 2004 and 5 and 6 and 7, the war went on. But he would like us to go back to 2003. But he was, by the second term, he was less influential than he was in the first term. There was a change in who was the Secretary of State, and I think Bush was more likely to listen to his new Secretary of State than he was to Powell. But okay, what would make more sense? What would have been a little more constructive? And what is still part of the struggle against Al-Qaeda and similar organizations? First of all, it was to make it clear that the enemy was Al-Qaeda and some similar organizations that maybe came about. And I think Obama did try to make that fairly clear. The term GWAT, Global War on Terrorism, was not used anymore. He didn't make it as explicit as he might, but it began to act in terms of that, focusing whatever armed struggle there was against al-Qaeda and targeting Osama bin Laden. It made it clear that you have to differentiate among different people who are members, leaders, fighters, supporters, good wishers for al-Qaeda, and use different strategies, different kind of persuasion for different people, use different kinds of resources when you're trying to appeal to one or another of these groups, and it's not all the same. And that meant more use of what's come to be called soft power, the idea of using smart power, the use of the American persuasive capabilities, its modeling capabilities. And the United States, despite some of this conduct, is still widely admired and desired to be a model for a way of life by many people. People want to come and study in the United States. They want to work here. Here in the United States. And there was an effort to avoid creating new enemies. Part of the problem with the earlier kind of construction and way of conducting the struggle would be that you generate more enemies because you're using very blunt tools, and that antagonizes people. I mean, we didn't have enemies in Iraq like we had after we tried to liberate them from their tyrant. As far as Osama bin Laden, aside from President Obama, the United States government did try to end the involvement in Iraq as quickly as possible because it figured that actually the longer we stayed, the worse things could get, not the better, and try to set it up so that we would not be causing more antagonism throughout the Middle East. And similarly with Afghanistan, to try to not do things that was creating more enemies, though the drone strikes have some of that effect at times. More work could have been done and should be done in cooperation with other Islamically populated countries, and work with the more groups who see this threat as a threat to them. And part of the Arab Spring is part of that reaction against what had been going the wrong way. Of course, it's a demonstration of the power of nonviolent struggle and also the importance of doing it with planning, forethought, and preparation. It worked effectively in Tunisia and Egypt, where there had been longer experience in civil society. Many of the young people had been reading Gene Sharp and others about nonviolent action. They studied the tapes about the videos of what happened in Serbia with Otpor, with the uprisings there that overthrew Milosevic. And they were much more disciplined in the execution of the action. What went on in Libya was certainly not of that kind of order. It was almost immediately became an armed struggle and rival groups fighting and contending among each other. So it isn't that nonviolent action is an automatic. It requires a lot of preparation, which is very difficult to do in an authoritarian regime, but if it's not done, it can be counterproductive. And in all of this, there's a role for non-governmental actors who are increasingly important. Sometimes, the U.S. government has been supportive of a lot of nonviolent of non-governmental organizations, and in doing so, sometimes have been quite creative in teaching people about how to build institutions which are democratic and reflective of the interests of the people, but sometimes maybe are a little overzealous, and so are the people who are being trained. They say, we can do this, and get overly optimistic about what is realistically possible at a given time. Okay, I'm going to move on to U.S. role in the Middle East. I want to make sure that we have time for a lot of questions and discussion, but let me say a few things about the U.S. mediation. I want to go through two circumstances: the Oslo peace process, and then what's going on at the moment. But the Oslo peace process, which began with such excitement and joy on the part of many of us, failed. It started in 1993. I happened to be on a interreligious group trip to the Middle East. We went to Jerusalem, Amman, Cairo, Damascus. And it's a great experience. It's great places to go to in an interreligious group. You understand, see Christianity in Damascus, and Islam in Jerusalem. But it was very interesting. This was a few months after the declaration of principles between Arafat and Rabin, the shaking of hands. And many of the people we spoke to were not so joyful. Many of the Palestinians were saying, what about us? This is a deal for Arafat. He's going to be president of Palestine, but what about us? We're in the camps, we're there. And the question we all kind of were asking each other, well, is this irreversible? And I think we all agreed it was irreversible. What had happened by this mutual recognition between the PLO and Israel was irreversible. But it didn't mean it would ever go back. It meant that it wouldn't go back to what it was, but it wouldn't necessarily be the end or totally constructive transformation in the conflict. There were some good measures taken and progress was made, and in 1995, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish zealot, what followed were negotiations and agreements, but the agreements were not implemented by either side. There were spoilers on both sides. Aside from the assassin of Yitzhak Rabin, there were other people who tried to disrupt and end the negotiations. And in that final rush to an end of conflict negotiations where everything was going to be put on the table and all the things that hadn't been dealt with were going to be dealt with before Clinton left the presidency and Rabin would face an election. They tried to have some meetings to deal with all of that, and the meetings didn't quite work. And then the Second Intifada occurred, which was devastating to the Israeli peace camp and to the Palestinian community as the Intifada was quite brutally suppressed. And that was the end of the Oslo peace process. So one could question what was the role, how good was the American mediation? Was the mediation something that would have worked any better? Maybe. I was in Jerusalem. No, these pictures were in Jerusalem. I'd taken a bus from Tel Aviv in a short time before Rabin was killed. And these are all images of Rabin plastering the wall with keffiyehs as a skull, and others of him as a Nazi, as a traitor to Jews, as a target. And I remember talking to somebody from Peace Now. I said, well, isn't this being answered? This is terrible. How can this go on like this? And he said, well, they have more money, but we're going to have a great peace rally when the new agreements are announced and supported. And of course, it was at that peace rally that Rabin was killed. So could a different degree of and kind of mediation have helped? Maybe not. Maybe nothing much would have changed the vigor of the opposition, but very little was tried to do that effectively. I'd like to counter that with the example of what happened in South Africa. We have this image of Mandela got out of prison and apartheid ended. There were negotiations and it ended. Well, the story, of course, is a little more complicated. There was a tremendous amount of violence in South Africa, some of it supported by the government's security forces, fighting between the Inkatha party and the ANC. There was the assassination of a good comrade of Mandela's, and Mandela got on television. De Klerk joined him and gave him the time to speak on television, and he spoke of how his comrade was a fighter for freedom for all of us, that he was identified by an Afrikaner woman, the assassin was identified by an Afrikaner woman, and we must all fight on for what he died for, which is freedom for all of us. There were rallies of protest. The government arrested some of the right-wing Afrikaner group that was opposing it, and the negotiations went on. That didn't happen between the Israeli Jews and Palestinians. The spoiling activities were often used as an excuse to interrupt things. And the U.S. was not very active about it. And the other thing was the implementation of whatever agreements were reached. Clinton and Dennis Ross was the main mediator at that time. Were not the most equal-handed mediators. I think they didn't understand the Palestinians as well as they understood the Israeli Jews. They thought the problem was much more to get the Jews in Israel to go along with the deal than the Palestinians. They failed, and so did the EU, in insisting step by step that implementation had to occur on schedule. It might not have worked, but anyway, if you think about it as an active, constructive way, other options might have been better. And finally, then, what about now? And I want to just, that's the wall between Bethlehem and Jerusalem from the Israeli side, and this is it from the Palestinian side, with some more humor and sense of resistance, but with some vigor and not just a whining or something of that sort. Because what had happened with the failed Second Intifada was Sharon, who then had become prime minister, after some delay, decided that there was no dealing with Arafat. We would simply cut off relations with the Palestinians, separate, and there was a separation wall, withdrew from Gaza without any cooperation with the PLO or the Palestinian Authority, wash our hands of it. We're doing this on our own. That didn't work either. And I think with the years that Bush was president, they only at the end was there some positive action. When Obama became president, he took some very, I think, sensible first steps. Met with, he went to Cairo, gave this marvelous speech about mutual respect. Clearly he was trying to set a different relationship. He chose to say no more settlements, and then we can get a negotiation started. That only went for a few months, and that was the end of the whole process. Only now, with some ingenious pressure, I think, of a mediator, our negotiations have been revived. And I think Kerry has been extraordinary in his energy and some creativity, but still I think there are some limitations to what is being done, and much will depend upon non-governmental actions by people in the area and from Europe and the United States and Canada. And this is helping essentially and most importantly, I think, to support and build the Palestinian economy. And considerable progress has been made, actually, in that. And that obviously needs much more. And for the U.S. government, I would think that it could begin acting in ways which already indicate a new status of relationship, rather than trying to put all the burden on a negotiated agreement between the PLO and the Israeli government. And I mentioned a few of those things in that diagram. And as an example of non-governmental action, I've mentioned the Euro-Arab Jewish Dialogue Group here, and we have one in Syracuse, in which we did start in 1981. And these things make a difference for the community in which they are in. They make a difference, improve relations among people of different religions within each community. They influence government policy in the longer run. And I think not only for what they do, but even for their very existence. This is an image of 5 of us from SAMED, our Syracuse Area Middle East Dialogue, who got an award from the Interfaith Works organization in Syracuse, and they decided to call what we were doing Courageous Conversations, which I would be not too immodest to say it's an exaggeration. But anyway, it becomes a model for other people that this does occur, it can occur, and more of it could be done. So let me conclude with just 2 other observations, and then I'd like to talk with you and hear what you have to say. First of all, by now I hope it seems obvious that conflicts can be done better rather than worse. Too many of them are done destructively, and we know better. We know better and can do better. And too often, I think people in the United States, at least, will say, oh, it's terrible what's going on over there. And we either have to send our military forces in or not do anything. And that's a mistake, obviously. There's a lot of things that the United States and the American people can and do besides send troops or do nothing. And part of that has to do with what non-officials as well as officials do in making foreign policy and in executing it. People do business, people do studies, people do travel, relationships get formed, and they become necessary for an enduring and sustainable peace, and one that lasts with some more attention to justice and equality and liberty for everybody. So with that, I'd like to stop and hear what your questions and comments are.
Dr. Kriesberg, why don't I take the microphone around to people who might want to ask a question, and you're mic'd up already, so is this all right? Wow. So we have a few minutes for some questions. If anybody wants to raise their hand, I'll come running up to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kriesberg, for being with us today, and thank you for the clarity of the paper that you presented. I just have a question with respect to your observation that there appears to be less killing statistically in the world than there used to be. That is perhaps a new thought to me, but I would like to hear your comments on to what degree do you think the information age has contributed to the reduction of killing? And you had mentioned the United Nations, which is often under a lot of criticism, but it seems to me that the rather courageous reporters that are now at every single international crisis point beaming back to us what is actually happening may have a significant effect on just how our leaders then react and the kind of debate that goes on. But I would like to hear your comments on that.
Well, there is the reference sometimes to the CNN effect, and there have been actually research about the CNN effect. How? But not the people of Fox. So CNN, actually that kind of research has indicated, well, CNN sometimes follows where the government's already beginning to look. But I think you're right that aside from the mass media, the social media have really become important. And not only among the perpetrators of the resistance at times, but in mobilizing support and drawing support. And that is part of what certainly is part of the explanation. I really neglected to point out that the global integration, economic, social, cultural, which we're experiencing, makes war more destructive for everybody. Everybody gets impacted in bad ways. So everybody has an interest in saying, cut it out, stop it. And trying to think about how to do that. And I think that does contribute to that decline in mass violence.
I like that term, global integration.
Any other?
In your breakdown of statistics about the reduction in violence, it's my impression from what I've read that it still affects women and children disproportionately. Do your statistics bear that out?
Well, I don't know what you mean by disproportionately.
In the sense that if you look at the numbers from the past to the present, the most vulnerable of all people, children and women, are still more likely to be affected as compared to others.
Well, there are different ways of calculating this sort of thing. And actually, say, civilian deaths, which is often what I've seen more reference to, have not gone up relative to combat deaths. And there have been efforts at looking at that. Part of the thing is that wars are, it depends what unit you're looking at. For some of these wars occurred now in a very limited area of a country. And most of the country is doing pretty well, and they're doing better than ever. So that life expectancy has gone up in Africa tremendously, despite all these wars, because most of the wars are in some place, and elsewhere health conditions are better, so the women are less likely to die in childbirth. And so if you look at, it depends on what kind of data you're ending up looking at. If you look at the rate of deaths that are caused by the war, well, actually a lot of people are living longer because they're not involved in the war. But where it is, it's obviously, it's producing refugees and they suffer, and for those particular circumstances, yes. But I think on the whole, there's so many other things that are working against the mass killings that at a gross level, things are getting better.
South Africa, for example, 1 in 3 women now will be subject to sexual harassment and rape. 1 in 3.
All right.
The rape capital of the world.
I don't know about the data. Now, I think that the Simon Fraser have a couple reports on some of that, but matters of rape, other kind of violence, are not impacted the same way as the physical killing of people, and I would agree with that.
Dr. Kriesberg, in terms of Syria, are the world governments as well as non-government organizations doing everything they can there? Often, as an outsider, we're just getting, the terrible parts. What advice would you give to governments around Syria? And what do people like myself, who just end up reading the big headlines, find hope in something that looks and not feel so powerless?
I don't know.
That's fair.
Everybody by now is afraid that, not everybody obviously, but the U.S. government is afraid that their intervention will exacerbate it rather than not. If it is, and even if they simply give military aid to the good guys that they like, they're not so sure it wasn't in the bad guys' hands. In the end, the guns just lead to greater violence everywhere. I don't know. I think some military aid is going through, obviously, to those opposing Assad as well as to those who are supporting him from different governments, from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, and Iran. The humanitarian aid is going in. There is some people in the State Department working with refugees from Syria, are giving them training and institution building. And you say, well, we've got to think about the longer run. There's little we can do now, but there will be something 5 years from now. What do you do about that? And that's one possible way of saying, well, we do what we can do. Can't expect us to fix everything. And obviously, that grandiosity is a road to hell. So I'll answer other questions. I don't know.
As you say, the pattern of conflict had changed throughout the world, and instead of these nation-state wars, now we have more internal wars, intrastate wars. And also, as you said, also the last thing that you said about sometimes the war is it focused in certain areas of a country, and the rest of the country is doing fine, in quotation marks.
Yeah.
What is the thing that, what are the causes of that thing that is happening? And I asked this question because I'm from Venezuela. And many people come here and tell me, what's happening with your family in Venezuela? And you know, my family is in a certain area of the country that nothing is happening.
Yeah.
And I think that is not only my case. I think that also happened in Egypt, also can also happen in Syria, and in other countries. So what is the causes of this, now this like a shrinking of conflicts, and what makes possible that certain areas of a country that is in war or in a huge violence can live normally?
Yeah. Well, some of those local things are done by local groups who have no great ambitions except getting some minerals or getting a little drugs or getting this. They're gangsters, in effect. And they have no grandiose ambitions to do anything except get rich by what they can seize. And so with the war, it's consisting of efforts to stop them from doing that, and they'll fight against it, and the rest of the country goes on its way. And sometimes I think it's that the fighting is contained by the authorities, and there's enough intervention to change it. A lot. It's interesting that in the past, wars almost always ended by one side defeating the other. And now about half of them end by negotiation, which means that before it gets really widespread, that people begin thinking, well, let's work this out somehow and make a deal. And the foreign intervention makes that more likely, I think.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for your talk. I'm wondering, in your expertise, what thoughts you have about, we've mentioned Syria this evening, so constructive conflict with an individual or a government that has no desire to come to some resolution about constructive conflict.
Well, I don't think any party to a fight thinks they are bad. They think they're on the right side. Maybe there's some gangster even thinks, well, look, everybody's a gangster. Look at those rich barons, you know. I just do it with a gun, they do it with the banks, you know. I'm not any worse than anybody else. They don't think they're evil. Nobody thinks they're evil. So they're not saying, I don't think anybody says we just want to be wanton killers for the joy of it. They will at least articulate this as they're doing it for some worthy enough reason, for their group, for their class, for their religion, something. And insofar as that's the case, you can begin saying, well, how can you get some of that without the cost that what you're doing is producing? That may not be something that the government would want to say because you can't deal with them and so on, but other outsiders might. It's more possible than we think. I'm not saying that there were really some really terrible people doing terrible things. But more often than we generally think, there are other things that can happen. It's not a cure-all, but
We'll do one more question, and then we have a reception in a few minutes after we have a presentation from one of our PhD students, so you'll be able to buttonhole him for the next little while. But Ab, you had a question, then we'll round up.
Yes, thank you. Great presentation. My question is, based on your wealth of knowledge about conflict resolution and historical, going back many, many years, I want to go back now to the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Palestinians. And based on your knowledge of the past, where do you see things resolving. And I'm hoping that it will be resolved. It will have to be resolved, just like any other conflict has been resolved in the past. Where do you see this is going, and especially the Obama administration, what they are trying so hard lately? Is this going to be resolved anytime soon, and if so, how?
I'm no better at predicting these things than anybody else, including Netanyahu or Abbas, probably. I don't know that it's knowable, but I think what is being tried is pretty good. And by finally trying to deal with all the major issues, that's necessary, but you need trade-offs, which require a package. Keeping it secret while you're doing that, because you don't want the opposition to seize on one issue. And maybe this idea of having a little a framework, which then lengthens the time for the negotiation, is a way to do it. Fortunately, Obama is not at the end of his 4 years, but it's still relatively early. Kerry can be around it. I think it's been unfortunate with timing and some of these things, where certainly with the Oslo process, if the elections were not coming up when they did, there was maybe something could even have happened with Oslo. You said some of the negotiations that occurred afterwards were getting closer. So I guess I guess this is more a hope than any expectation that there will be 2 states. There will be arrangements which will lead to cooperation, because it can't work without it. And that will yield mutual benefit. Netanyahu, when he spoke to AIPAC, apparently talked about the great value of peace and how peace would be a benefit to Israel. And the idea that, that the Arab Spring is frightening to many Jews in Israel. Who can tell what will happen next? It's also a way of saying, settle what you can. That's more security than just trying to stick where you are now, which is getting increasingly unstable. So I think you can make a case why it's possible, when maybe a few months ago we didn't think that even that was case for many decades. But I agree, ultimately it's going to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. I understand that we have one of our Peace and Conflict Studies PhD students here to have a thank you. Danielle? Oh, you aren't Danielle. It's Saeed, right? Yeah, Saeed Khan. Saeed is one of our PhD students in the Peace and Conflict Studies. Sorry? And, oh, sorry, master's. Well, you look so distinguished. I thought you were a PhD. So, anyway, I'll pass the microphone to you before I make more gaffes.
Hi, everybody. As you can probably know by now, I'm not Danielle. She couldn't make it today because of an accident, but she's doing perfectly fine. On behalf of the faculty, staff, and student body here at the Arthur V. Mauro Centre for Peace and Justice, I would like to thank you, Dr. Kriesberg, for taking out time from your busy schedule to be with us this evening in the city which we not so fondly refer to as Winterpeg. I would also like to thank you for a very insightful talk this evening, as well as for your amazing contributions to the field of peace and conflict studies, which we humbly recognize not only this evening, but also recognized at a colloquium organized in your honor earlier, where my colleague Ranyukashi and I presented. Finally, I would also like to thank Tally for making this evening possible. Tally, you are truly the best.
We're coming to the end of our evening. I want to do some special thank yous, and then we have a small reception outside in the hallway. So you aren't finished your work here, Dr. Kriesberg. We want to thank Sean Byrne and Jessica Senahai, who were the leaders in this. I want to thank Tali Sitchkar, who did a lot of the heavy lifting of coordinating this event and communications and so on and so forth, and all the board members and you members of the audience. It's wonderful that we can get together in an evening and hear a distinguished lecturer speak on something that's very important to us all. So thank you very much for coming here this evening. I should mention next weekend we have a theologian coming to St. Mary's Academy Sunday evening, and then Monday she'll be speaking here in this theater or upstairs, but it's on ecumenism, which is the crossing of different divisions between different denominations in the church, the Christian church. And so in other words, in a week from now, we have a distinguished theologian, Dr. Catherine Clifford, to speak on creative conflict and building peace. Also, I want to mention April 6th, we're installing our new Chancellor, His Grace Archbishop Gagnon, who is here tonight. We're very honored to have His Grace here as part of our audience, and we will be installing him as our new Chancellor, as the Archbishop, on April 6th, and you're all welcome to come to that event. So with that, I want to say thank you very much for being here, and we will just go outside to the reception area. And there are some books there, I understand, if you wish to do some reading as a follow-up to this lecture. So thank you very much, Dr. Kriesberg. And Dr. Kriesberg will be leading a roundtable with graduate students tomorrow morning in the college here. So this is a traveling feast we have. Thank you.